it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Hello, I'm Noni Freeman. Welcome to Shine, our very first episode of a program about everyday real people who are growing seeds of greatness. We have a wonderful guest today, Pastor Ruth Miriam from Church on the Cape in Cape Porpoise, Maine, who is just a very special friend of mine and a person who does outstanding things in the community, who went from a devastating experience with mental illness to becoming a real tremendous asset to the rest of the world, a real servant of love. But before we talk to Ruth, what I'd like to invite you to do is to sit back, relax, and just take a moment to go to your heart and listen to this tune, one of my very favorites, composed and performed by Wiley Beveridge and Jen Camo. You are welcome here.
You are welcome here. You are welcome here. You are welcome here. So open your heart and listen. So open your heart and listen. You are welcome here.
You are welcome here.
You are welcome here.
You are welcome here.
You are welcome here. So open your heart and listen. So open your heart and listen. You are welcome here. You are welcome here. You are welcome.
Now, I'd love for you to meet Pastor Ruth Miriam, today's guest. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you.
I was so touched the time when you shared your personal story about having gone through a real devastating experience with mental illness. I found it very inspiring. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our guests at home.
I'd be happy to. First of all, I should probably say that I was always very afraid of mental illness as I saw it manifested in other people. And I think that if anyone said, if there's anything you don't want to have happen to you, what would it be? It would have been very likely for me to have said, to have anything to do with mental illness. I don't ever want to be perceived as wacko, crazy, nuts. I want to stay away from that. And as it happened, I was in seminary at the time and had a devastating breakup with a man that I assumed I was meant to marry. He was also United Methodist and headed for the parish ministry. And as it turned out, there was someone else, and I really couldn't take it. And I became very depressed and then manic, and did those quote-unquote crazy things that I would never have guessed I would be capable of doing, like tearing my room apart, sheets, all of that.
How old were you then?
I would have been 25.
So around 25,
Yes.
you actually sunk into mental illness. You actually found yourself dealing with the fear that you had been afraid of for most of your life.
That's right. And I remember the diagnosis when they said, I said, what happened to me? And they said, you are mentally ill and you have manic depression. And I thought, depression? I'm a happy person. What is this? And then I felt the stigma. Everyone from now on is going to look at me and say, she's one of those people. And it was a real struggle to claim my identity after that.
Now, didn't you also spend some time in hospital?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
I was hospitalized 3 different times. One time was in Metropolitan State outside Boston, so that's pretty serious. It was a month apiece in each place. And I remember one time when I was admitted, I was put in a room that had no windows. All it was for the outside world, a little slit in the door. And they'd put my food on a tray and shoot it through, and I wouldn't have any silverware because I might take my life. It was, as I said, intense. And
It's frightening to think of being in that situation.
that was, and it also felt like a death in that I thought, I can't possibly be useful. I will be institutionalized for the rest of my life, and basically it's over, is what it felt like.
And all of this came on as a result of a broken heart.
Well, that was what triggered it. Yeah, I know in hindsight, manic depression was in the family. My aunt had it, in the genes. It was just as if it were waiting for some trigger to get me started.
How did you deal with the stigma?
I tried to ignore that anything was wrong. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I resolved that I was going to finish the semester by hell or high water. And of course I couldn't. I was drooling because of my medication, and I'd have to go around with a washcloth. It wasn't appealing. Not a very attractive sight. My hands were shaking. I couldn't concentrate. So consequently, my first big surrender was to say, I can't do this. I'm going to graduate after my class does. And I wasn't sure that once I left early, I wouldn't be nicely and politely asked not to return. That I wouldn't get a letter saying, obviously you're not of ministerial material. We really don't think we can use you.
So much was on the line.
It was.
And you surrendered.
I did, in that I couldn't possibly fight anymore. I couldn't continue the work and do passably well. So I had to go home.
You had to go home. You had to actually embrace this experience.
That's right.
Which was very, very frightening, very, very painful.
That's right.
What happened next?
Next, I was home for about a month, and I went to see a Baptist pastor. I had heard him preach. He's pretty well known. He'd written a book or 2. And I picked him because he was out of town and no one would know. They wouldn't see me walking into the church. I felt anonymous. And I told him that here I had lost the love of my life, but even the bigger loss still was losing that sense of call. That I thought, God, I thought you wanted me. I was ready. I signed on. Why am I rejected so early? And he gave me wonderful wisdom that I've never forgotten. He said 2 things. First of all, he said, number 1, God's timing is different from your timing. You may think that just because you're not graduating with the rest, that because your timing is out of whack, that God doesn't have any use for you. That's not what that means. It means it might take longer, but keep going.
God has a plan.
God has a plan, just keep going. Never mind the calendar. Throw that out, just do it. And then this was the life-giving advice. He said, what you are going through now and what you have gone through is going to be the most valuable experience in the active ministry that you could ever possibly have. And this, when he said to me these words, I left with hope. he said, when you get back in, when you are a minister. And I thought, when?
That's positive thinking for you.
Oh, it was that one word, when. And for him to say, don't deny this experience, learn from it. And so all of a sudden, instead of being a victim of this terrible curse, I was an observer. And I was thinking, you know, what would other people experience that's like what I'm feeling? I started being more circumspect about the depression that I was feeling. These days, I love to get up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. I am a morning person. Those days, I made myself get up at 11 a.m.
A huge difference.
I just, that was the kind of depression I was in. So it helped me step back and look at it objectively instead of just as someone who was suffering from this terrible feeling of hopelessness and despair.
And we can see why.
Mm.
Things turned around, though. Things eventually, obviously, turned around for you so that you ended up graduating from Schiller University, 1973.
Well, actually, I had graduated from Schiller before.
Okay.
When all this happened, I was at Yale Divinity School.
Okay. Which you graduated from in 1981?
Yes.
And then you went on to get your Doctor of Ministry degree from Boston University School of Theology in 1987. You really made the most out of your situation. How did you do that? How did you come back up from out of the ashes to rebuild your life?
I think it was because I had confidence. I had confidence that I had been to the bottom, that I had been to the pit, that I had been to the depths, and I survived. And so, as a consequence, I had this feeling that I was partially prepared. I was somewhat qualified to be with other people who were in the depths. And when I graduated from seminary, it was my intention to be a hospital chaplain and to work with dying children. And I wanted to be with them because I thought that a lot of times their parents are so petrified and so sad they can't be. I didn't want the child to have to suffer all by him or herself. And so that was why I was motivated to do the additional 5 years for the DMin. And my thesis was called Listen to the Dying, and I interviewed oncology nurses at Children's Hospital and asked them about their experiences with these children who obviously had limited time.
You know, I wonder if your experience with such intense pain has also served to enable you to go places other people fear to go. For instance, I know you spent time with Mother Teresa, with the Sisters of the Missionary of Charity in Calcutta, India, for several weeks. You went right where poverty is some of its worst it can be on this planet. Tell us about those experiences.
Well, that's a little bit different. That had to do with the fact that before I was fully launched in the ministry, I really wanted to meet a saint, a real, live, living saint. And so I remember I was on a plane and I prayed to God and I said, God, I promise I will not ask you for another thing. I won't ask you for children. I won't ask you for a husband. I won't ask you for anything. I just really, really want to meet a saint so that I know that I'm on the right path. So I'm fully convinced that there are such people. And I kind of would really like it if you'd let me meet Mother Teresa. So that was on this very momentous plane ride. And then I remember I was watching a special on her, on Mother Teresa, and her last words were, you don't have to come to Calcutta. What you have to do is to go to the person next door and be Christ to them, see Christ in them. And that's what it's all about. It's not about coming to Calcutta. And we don't need more people in Calcutta. It was like that, more volunteers. Well, believe it or not, that was my spur, because I said, good. All this time I'd held back. I didn't want to be rejected by Mother Teresa, but now I had a good reason, because I could have told myself, well, I know she's not encouraging, she wants people to stay back, and so, of course, I don't have to take it personally. Well, with that said, on Halloween night, I wrote, I was emboldened. I don't know whether it was the goblins or what, but I wrote a letter to the Missionaries of Charity, to her specifically, Mother Teresa. I explained I would really like to come and work with the Missionaries of Charity. And this was obviously end of October. I didn't hear anything. November, nothing. December, and I thought the letter got lost. And in January, I got this very little letter that said, come ahead.
Wow.
And so off I went.
And if you'd never asked, if you'd never pursued it,
That's right.
never would have happened.
That's right.
But you kind of prepared yourself ahead of time. If it doesn't work
Yes.
out,
Well, rejection has always, that was the trigger for my manic depressive.
right.
It was rejection. And again, what held me back with Mother Teresa was just this fear. What if Mother Teresa doesn't want me? A saint doesn't want me. It was that kind of thing.
and it worked out.
Yes, I got to meet her several times. And yeah, one of the huge blessings of my life.
Well, so many times I think of you as the Mother Teresa of Cape Porpoise. You kind of look like her in some ways, but you also just personify that kind of loving kindness that I attribute to her. Down with the Church on the Cape and with the community at large, I know you make a tremendous difference. I really do believe that church is your vocation. I know that as a member of the Church on the Cape, I've been involved very, very much with many of the Sunday worship services and some of the different activities. I really appreciate your love of church and the difference that your leading the congregation makes down at the church on the Cape. I was wondering if you could tell us what your passion is at this point, Ruth. What are you most passionate about?
Well, you're right. I do love the church. And I can say that in that if I'm not preaching, if I don't have anywhere to be, when I was on leave, I had a family leave for 3.5 years when I had our daughter Julie. I would try to go to at least 2 or 3 different worship services in the morning. I just thoroughly enjoy the experience of worship. And
What is it
I
lights you up? Because I can tell.
Yeah. Well, I think at the Church on the Cape, for example, is this all right if I?
Absolutely.
All right. Of course, it's the music that draws people. And what I especially appreciated is it's not these slow, drawn-out hymns. We sing hymns like fight songs, and it just charges me, and it gives me so much energy. And it's singing to God, and I want to sing to God. I want my life to sing to God. And so to be surrounded by other people who are doing the same thing. And then the presence of the Holy Spirit. When you walk into that room, meaning the sanctuary, you can feel that there's something there, and it's kind of an electric charge. And to be there with other people who are feeling the same thing, it's just, I hope that the future generations can have that same experience as we do.
It's a wonderful experience, and I know that you do have a lot of concern about the future and what's happening with the church. What do you foresee?
Well, sadly, I have served in 7 churches in my career, and of those 7, 4 have shut their doors. 4 are closed. 2 are really struggling, and by that I mean they sing to a CD player instead of being able to pay for an organist or a piano player. Yeah, that's very deeply saddening to me. what gives me hope is things like seeing the faith manifested in younger people. On June 19th, I'm going to Taizé, France. And it's a spiritual pilgrimage. It was founded by Brother Roger. That was the book that I was looking at. And you have to be 29 or under, or not have to be. The bishop takes a group, bishop from the United Methodist Church. And it is for those who are 29 and under and still seeking. And thousands come. And it's to pray, basically, 3 times a day, as I
How are you
understand
getting
it.
to go?
Well, that was a major effort. I was trying to find a place that would take old people, and the Baptists do. So I'm going with a little tiny group of 8 old people. And I'll be staying off campus, and then hopefully I'll get to be surrounded by these young people who have a passion for the faith, a passion for prayer, and maybe it will help me understand, well, obviously, the intensity of the yearning is so strong. How can that better be translated into churches as they exist today?
You can probably feel Pastor Ruth's passion as she talks. We happen to have a clip of Ruth giving one of her recent sermons. I believe it was called Where in the World is Jesus?
That's right.
Right? Which she gave at the church on the Cape in Maine. Let's take a look.
Where in the world is Jesus? That question has been asked since Jesus was born. You remember it was one of the earliest questions asked by the wise men when they were hunting for the baby. And so here they make the trek. They get all the way to Jerusalem, all the way to the palace, all the way to Herod, and they say, "Where is the child born to be the King of the Jews? Where is Jesus?" But that question doesn't go away. You remember when Jesus was 12 years old, his parents took him to the temple, and he was talking to the priests and engrossed in conversation. And then Mary and Joseph had this nightmare that all parents experience when they can't find their kids. I had that happen once. I lost Julie in a library. And I can still feel the heart palpitation. Where is she? A very, very frightening feeling. For Mary and Joseph, they had such a large family. They thought, well, it's with the aunts or the uncles. And surprise, not. So what happened was 3 days later, they thought to return to the temple and found him. 3 days. And so all those 3 days, can you imagine how many times they would have asked God, where in the world is Jesus? That question didn't go away when Jesus was in his active ministry, when Mary and Martha were waiting for him because Lazarus was dying. They knew he and he alone could bring him to life, and he wasn't anywhere around. And their question was the same. Where in the world is Jesus? That question didn't even subside after Jesus died. You remember Mary Magdalene going to the tomb. She couldn't even find his corpse. Where in the world is Jesus? And all these many, many years later, that question still has not gone away. It hasn't gone away for the woman who sits in the third pew, left-hand side of the church. And all her life long, she's gone to church and she's found Jesus right there. Every single week, she's come to worship. But now that church is closed. And she can't sit in that pew. And she can't find Jesus there. And so she's asking, where in the world is Jesus? It's not only that woman. We know the stories of the churches closing. We know all of that. We know there are many, many people who right now at this stage of lives in their faith are asking that age-old question, where in the world is Jesus?
Great sermon, Ruth. Enjoyed it. I also know that you're a budding thespian, that you like to perform in some presentations and sometimes do some writing and directing, sometimes a number of times down at the church. She's quite busy with all these kinds of activities. And one of those that you did recently was called Who Moved My Cheese? I believe you wrote an adaptation taken from the book written by Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese, which was maybe a 10-minute presentation that you might have given. Do you want to tell the folks at home a little bit about your inspiration for this?
Sure. I was interested in the fact that Spencer Johnson really didn't have any religious motivation, not specifically so. He's a medical doctor. And so this book was written to help corporate America, business America, look at change and look specifically at how we see ourselves and how by our attitudes we can prepare to adapt to change better. And so Who Moved My Cheese is obviously about mice, and mice who are indignant and who are afraid. And it reminded me very much of the feelings that I have seen and I'm sure experienced in seeing the institutional church being forced to change. And so I do think it's timely. The message being that if you have a positive attitude, if you keep in mind that what you're looking for is worth the effort, you can get it, you can find it. It's when we focus instead on the extraneous things, we lose our focus. And
So again, having a positive attitude.
that's right.
Makes
Attitude
a world
is
of difference.
Huge.
Believing in the possibility that there is some cheese out there.
Right. And it might not be the cheese that we've had before.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I preach that in the sermon, I do think that the core of what church is about, which is religion, the word religio, is to bind, to connect. And I think that that is part of the human condition, this desire, deep desire to connect. And that I really don't think is going to die.
The desire to connect is going to continue.
And because I'm Christian, I would say it's the desire to connect with Jesus Christ, but I think also the desire for people to connect with each other, to connect with God. And when that's there, it's going to find a form somehow to express that desire.
People in the church are struggling with change, having to make some adjustments, maybe head in a different direction, find their spiritual nourishment somewhere, but not be stuck with the same old, same old. Well, we have a surprise for you. We've got a clip from the adaptation that Ruth wrote, Who Moved My Cheese, which was performed at Church on the Cape a short while ago. Let's take a look.
They had no idea where the cheese came from or who gave it to them. They just assumed that it would always be there where they expected to find it.
There's enough cheese here to last forever.
We deserve this cheese.
They built their whole lives around its supply. But one morning, they arrived at the place where the cheese had always been, and it wasn't there. What to do? The two mice were angry.
What?
No cheese?
Who moved the cheese?
They spent a long time hemming and hawing. Mostly, they kept looking around in the same place to make sure that the cheese really was gone. Then they began to panic. What will happen if there is no more cheese? They froze and became like statues. Eventually, Hem and Haw began analyzing the situation, asking,
How could this have happened?
We don't deserve this.
As they sputtered, Hem and Haw were becoming increasingly frustrated, not to mention hungry, and they started blaming each other. Finally, in desperation, Haw said,
Let's stop. Go hunt for new cheese.
No, I'm staying right here. It's dangerous out there. Besides, I'm too old for adventure. And I hate getting lost.
With that, Haw realized that he too was afraid and decided to stay put. Sooner or later, someone had to put their cheese back. At last, after waiting and waiting and waiting, Haw said,
It's time to go out and find new cheese.
But what if there is no cheese out there? And even if there is, what if we can't find it?
I don't know.
There was a long silence until Haw suddenly said,
Okay. It's May's time.
Always broadening your horizons. You're always going somewhere new. You're heading for a new frontier in pursuit of what you really love. Obviously, what really makes a huge difference for you. And in the process of it, you really are growing seeds of greatness that I know. It's an inspiration for myself and for the folks watching at home. It doesn't really matter what it is that is our cross to bear or is our challenge. It really depends on what it is that we make of it. And you have made the very best out of the situation that you had dealt with years ago, and I thank you so much for that.
Oh,
And for sharing it with me and all of our viewers.
thank you. What an honor to be asked.
Well, thank you for being here. And to help you folks at home, maybe go to your hearts and feel a bit closer yourselves to God, we've prepared a beautiful meditation performed by Wiley Beveridge, Jen Camo, Michelle Curry, myself, Mike McNerney, and Neil Zwig. The piece is called One Power. Let's watch.
One power, one God, one power, one God. I surrender, I let go. I surrender, I let go. One power, one God. One power, one God. I surrender, I let go. I surrender, I let go. One power, one God. One power, one God. I surrender, I let go. I surrender, I let go. One power, one God. One power, one God. I surrender, I let go.
Well, thank you for tuning in to our first episode of Shine. I'm Noni Freeman, and I hope to see you right back here next time with our next episode. In the meantime, keep on shining the light.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.